Day 70 to 7:42 p.m. New Infanta Settlement, Barangay Banugao, Infanta, Quezon. New Infanta Settlement, it was the settlement built from everyone's sweat and effort. After the disaster of the rampaging storm and flood 30 days ago, the two different settlements in Quezon merged into one and built this safe haven together. Thus, unlike in Bay City Settlement, where the survivors mostly relied on the military, the people here valued this place highly. The military was not the sole protector of this place. Everyone was. The early days were tough. The infected in nearby areas and mutated animals from across the river would attack almost every day. Everyone capable of fighting had to be ready to be called to fight at any time. It was very fortunate for them that the animals tamed by the young Miss of Salvador family were always out to warn them of any approaching danger. By everyone's efforts, proper walls were built around the settlement. Compared to the walls of Bay City Settlement, the walls here looked shabby. Nevertheless, the military made sure that these walls were tall and strong enough to fend from usual dangers. Of course, they were still putting efforts to improve these walls, but since they were still gathering enough materials, they were taking it at one step at a time. This night, however, the soldiers were up and were preparing. As there was no alarm for an emergency, the people of the settlement were confused. Asking around, they learned that it was not a preparation for battle but to prepare for the arrival of some people. This made the people surprised. As this place here was scoured already by most scavenging groups, they all knew that there were no other settlements nearby. Furthermore, since the military was informed about the arrival, it was very likely that the people arriving belonged to the military, or in the least, had some relations to them. It meant that these people actually came from far away and managed to traverse the mutagen infected world and reach this place. That was a piece of pretty amazing news for them. Thus, aside from the military, many people gathered for the anticipated arrival of the guests. Past 8 in the evening, the convoy finally arrived. The bystanders were alarmed by the monster running along with the convoy. However, seeing that the soldiers were not making a move, it was very likely that the monster was not a threat. Some of them could not help but remember the dragon incident that happened before. There were also the animals of the Salvador family. Animals and monsters like this could possibly be tamed with the right methods. That was what they were thinking. The gates opened soon, letting the convoy enter. Seeing some of the vehicles with strange appearances, both the people and the soldiers were surprised. It made them feel like that some groups with advanced technology arrived. The convoy was led by some military vehicles to the military compound on the western side of the settlement. Mark and his group watched the scene inside the settlement as the vehicles drove through the street. Unlike the last time he came here, there was a lot of improvement. The farmlands were now filled with newly grown crops, there were walls around, and the devastating atmosphere the people had was gone. It seemed that by participating in the rebuilding of the settlement from scratch, the people started to accept the current situation of the world. Upon arriving at the military compound, the officials of the military were already waiting. Led by General Faustino, they welcomed the members of the convoy. Mark, being the commander of the convoy, accepted the welcome. "It's good to see you again," General Faustino said as he stretched his right hand towards Mark for a handshake. Mark, who still hated to do handshakes, resigned to it and accepted the greeting. "I'm given a mission, so here I am," Mark replied with a shrug. If there was no need to bring Sherville and his family here along with the soldiers and their families, Mark and his group would have gone straight to the base in the mountains. Major Bautista, Colleen's father, was also here and happily welcomed the return of his daughter. Of course, as she would still leave to join Mark's group, he was cherishing his time with his daughter. First Lieutenant Baller and the soldiers that participated in the mission were commended by the officials too. What made every soldier here happy the most was the fact that not a single soldier was lost in this mission. It was almost like a miracle, as every corner in this world now could cause death at any possible time. "Colleen." Two voices hurriedly called out to Colleen. The two were no other than Joash and Tyson. Joash tried to embrace Colleen. Of course, like a cat with its tail stepped on, she dodged and hid while clinging behind Mark, who was nearby. This made Mark rather annoyed. Your father is there. Why are you hiding behind me? Sorry, I just did it by reflex. Colleen looked like a kid that did a bad thing. She really hid behind Mark without thinking. She slowly turned at May, who was beside Mark, and sighed in relief that she did not look angry as she clung behind Mark. Joash could only step in front of Mark with an admonishing look. So, it's really true, huh? Joash said as his eyes landed at May. Since Joash stood in front of them, May, who was not really paying attention, saw him. Cousin? She spoke in a confused tone while she pulled on Mark's sleeve. It was a rather stale reunion for two relatives. Although they knew each other, they were really not close. Joash did not mind it. He knew about the circumstances May had before because of her family. Seeing here being too attached to Mark and looking better than before, he had no complaints about May. Of course, Colleen was another thing. Did you also took Colleen as your woman? Joash frankly asked Mark with an annoyed look. What are you talking about? Mark replied and turned his eyes towards Colleen. Can you let go already? You're giving others a wrong idea. Colleen retreated slowly before running off to her father. There's the answer you want, Mark said to Joash, who was now scratching his head. I know, I've been rude, but you don't have to be that harsh on Colleen. Joash already understood that Mark had no interest in Colleen. Of course, he felt a bit troubled seeing the person he liked being reprimanded that way. It was also partly his fault, so he became rather guilty. Oh, Joe, another voice chimed in calling for Joash. Of course, he was surprised as he saw Annalyn waving from the window of the sci-fi-looking truck. The procedures went smoothly and the convoy finally dispersed. Before everyone went in different ways, the soldiers that came from Bay City expressed their gratitude to Mark's group for keeping everyone safe throughout the whole journey. There were a lot of close calls that could have claimed a life of one or two soldiers at every instance, but Mark and his group went on great lengths to protect everyone. If Mark's group was not in this mission, it would be questionable if they would have ever made it here. These soldiers' gratitude and respect towards Mark's group was already off the charts. As for Harold's group, they went on a separate way. Being survivors rescued by the soldiers, they would be brought to a facility to examine their health first thing by tomorrow. Mark's group, on the other hand, was brought to another place to spend the night. This place was just outside the military compound and was used as temporary dwellings by the soldiers before the compound was established. General Faustino actually wanted to bring Mark and his group to a better place. However, the facilities in the settlement were still severely lacking, and this much was the highest hospitality they could show. Mark's group had no problems with the temporary dwellings though. Although it was not as good as the mansion last night, it was way better than their previous two places they spent the night before. Thus, some decided to turn in for the night while some decided to group up and tour the settlement. It was already nighttime, but it did not mean that the activities in the settlement already ceased. As everyone dispersed, Edsel decided to walk around under the night sky. He did not know why, but he just felt like doing so. Edsel was not unfamiliar with this place as he had been here before the outbreak a lot of times. It was when he was selling his share of fish from their fishing sessions. Living back then was hard for an orphan like him. Nevertheless, it was fun and peaceful. Mark had been giving him pointers to fight and Colleen was teaching him how to properly use a gun. He would not deny that he had gotten stronger. Nevertheless, he could not deny the fact that Mark was holding back on making him stronger. It was not a secret now in the group that Mark could turn someone into an evolver or a mutator. Nevertheless, Mark did not give him his turn yet. This made him rather confused. It was as if he was still lacking something and Mark was waiting for him to learn about it. Colleen also seemed to know about it. If they would just tell me straight, Edsel murmured. However, it also occurred to him that it was better to realize it himself. This way, he would be able to understand it more deeply than being told by other people. He just wished that he would be able to understand himself further. Edsel had such deep thoughts in his mind that he started walking blankly. It was then that, "You seem to be troubled, young man." Edsel stopped as he heard a voice that seemed to echo in his heart and mind. It was as if he was familiar with the owner of the voice, and it even felt nostalgic. Nevertheless, he could not recall anything about it. He turned to the side of the road and saw a silhouette of a man leaning on a tree. Since the man was standing at a direction that the light from the nearest lamp would not shine, all he could see was the shape of the man's body. "Who are you? Do I know you?" Those were the first questions that escaped from Edsel's mouth. Hearing that, the man seemed to have smiled. "I'm sorry, but I can't answer that. At least, not right now." The man answered, which made Edsel even more confused. "Enough talking about me." The man continued. "You seem to be missing something, didn't you?" Edsel froze. He finally realized that this mysterious man seemed to know what was going on with his mind. He got the feeling that this man had the answers he was looking for. However, he decided that he would look for the answers himself. "I don't know who you are or if you know the answer I'm looking for. Still, I don't need you to tell me. I don't want to disappoint boss and everyone," he added in his mind. Hearing that, the man under the tree seemed to have smiled even further. It was a lonely but proud smile. "You have grown mature in a short time." Those words gave Edsel the impression that his man had been watching him for a long time. "I'm sorry, but I have to go," Edsel said, and he turned around to leave. North of here, under Agos Bridge, the hut made of old tarpaulin with a lot of junk around it. The man spoke once more with sentences Edsel was not able to immediately comprehend. "Sir, what are you?" Edsel turned around once more. He was not able to finish his sentence. The man was not there anymore. This made the hairs on his arms stand. He looked around but saw nowhere that they could have hidden. The tree the man leaned before was totally at the side of the road, away from any other structure. It was as if he vanished like a ghost. Remembering that the existence of the ghosts was true made him even more creeped out. Still, the place that the man said seemed to have engraved itself in his mind and heart. There was a huge urge inside him telling him to go there. Thus, his random walk under the night gained a specific place to go. He could not help but wonder what could be waiting for him in that place. Day 70 to 9:17 p.m. New Infanta Settlement, Barangay Banugao, Infanta, Quezon. Under the night sky dimly lit by the moonlight, Edsel moved his feet at the side of the street. He just walked at the street side while staring in front blankly. His mind was filled with thoughts about different things. As for the direction he was heading to, he was going north. The man was too mysterious to the point of being creepy. He even vanished in a blink of an eye that could have spooked anyone. There was no reason for him to heed that man's instructions. Yet, he was here intending to go to the location the man mentioned. There was no reason for him to go other than the strong feeling inside him. It might just be an illusion on his mind. However, the feeling was too strong that he could not help but believe it. As such, here he was. He did not care whether there were fewer people as he went further. He did not mind even there were lesser houses and the place was darker. It was because he was moving further away from the center of the settlement. Since most of the battles around the settlement happened near the walls, the residential areas and other facilities were built at the center of the settlement. Most of the structures built near the walls were combat-oriented, such as bunkers and watchtowers. Even if there were houses or structures already built before, if the structure was near the walls, most people would not want to live in those. Whether the place looked luxurious or not, most people would rather live in temporary tents at the center of the settlement than stray near the walls. Only those capable enough would live in those houses, like survivor groups with evolvers and mutators. Still, the area north of the settlement was different. Even those survivor groups would rather stay away from the north and east walls, as all attacks of mutated animals come from those directions. Compared to the infected, more kinds of mutated animals and insects were capable of bypassing the walls. That was why in these areas, only soldiers could be seen near the walls patrolling. "Boy, are you lost?" A voice suddenly called out to him, which made Edsel snap back to reality. When he looked behind, there were two soldiers who seemed to be in the middle of their patrol. Did you say something?" "Sorry, I'm not paying attention." That was Edsel's response, as he did not hear the soldiers clearly. The two soldiers looked at each other first before repeating the question. We are wondering if you are lost. There's nothing but the bridge over that direction. The access through the bridge is only open during the day. Everyone was allowed to go in and out of the settlement at any time. Of course, everyone entering that was not part of the military had to undergo some checks during their re-entry. The only exception was the Agos Bridge, which only allowed exit during the day because there were more mutated animals active during the night. The closure of the bridge during the night was not for the safety of the settlement, but for the safety of the people. Sorry, I just arrived and didn't know about the bridge. Edsel scratched his head. But, I wonder if there is a hut under the bridge. Someone told me to go there. The two soldiers turned skeptical. The hut did exist, but who would ask a boy like Edsel to go there? However, one of the soldiers caught onto Edsel's reply. You said that you just came here? The soldier observed Edsel and saw that not only he was wearing a bulletproof vest but also had guns on him. Are you perhaps among the people that arrived from Bay City? Hearing that, Edsel nodded. I do. Oh, I'm not with the survivors. I'm with the escorts. Hearing that, the two soldiers nodded. The group that escorted the soldiers and the scientist from Bay City had special privileges. Thus, one of the soldiers called onto his radio and asked about Edsel's name. Confirming that what Edsel said was true, the two soldiers smiled. There's a hut under the bridge. We don't know why you are looking for the hut, but please don't do anything bad to the person that lives there. I see, thank you. Edsel thanked the two soldiers and turned to continue on his way. We will radio the soldiers on the bridge, so just tell them if you need something. One of the soldiers said before they continued on their patrol. Edsel understood those words as normal, not noticing that it also stood as a warning. In fact, there was even a hint of pity on the soldiers' faces upon mentioning the hut and the person that lived there. It was just that the darkness of the night hid those expressions. It did not take long and Edsel reached the bridge. Since the walls by the riverbank were built where the previous dikes were located, some parts of the bridge go above the walls. It seemed that it allowed the space under the bridge to be used by someone. The soldiers guarding the bridge saw Edsel because of his flashlight. However, it seemed that the two soldiers he met previously really informed the ones on the bridge as they just left Edsel alone. Some of the soldiers kept on watching him but no one approached. Edsel, on the other hand, approached the foot of the bridge. With his flashlight, he saw some poorly built structures under the bridge. It seemed that whoever built these things were not experienced in it. The thing that stood out the most was the hut directly built by the wall under the bridge. The hut was really made out of ragged tarpaulin. It was a small hut that could probably only fit a bed and a small table inside. Although it was shaped and looked like a hut, it was more appropriate to call it a shabby tent. Around the hut was filled with junk. It was not like the place was not being cleaned, but it felt more like that the one that did had no experience in cleaning at all. This scene suddenly reminded him of a certain person. She did her best as things like this. However, she was really bad and always gave up. This sudden thought made him sigh. Edsel looked around to find any trace of the man that told him to go here. However, he did not see anyone around. Without any choice, he approached the hut. However, for some reason he could not understand, his heart started to pound loudly and strongly. It was true that his current situation looked like a part of a horror film, but his heart was not pounding like this because of fear. Through the holes on the tarpaulin, Edsel could tell that there was gas lamp lit inside. It meant that there was someone inside. Hello? Is anyone inside? Edsel called out as it was impossible to knock on the door covered with nothing but tarpaulin. He suddenly heard sounds coming from inside the hut. It seemed that the person was startled that someone came here in the middle of the night. The door then opened slightly and a person peeped through the small gap of the door. Is there something you need from me? The person spoke. The voice was rather hoarse, but it was no doubt that the person was a woman. From the gap, she could be seen wearing a ragged cloak and with one of her hands, she was trying hard to cover her face. Only her eyes could be seen that squinted a bit because of the flashlight Edsel was carrying. Edsel, however, did not realize that the woman's eyes squinted. It was because he was shocked. His shock took control of his body and shoved the door open with force. It was too sudden that the woman was pushed back and lost balance. A loud cracking sound was heard as the woman fell on her shabby bed made of old bamboo. The woman was shocked and scared. She stared at the man in front of her with extreme fear. However, Edsel did not stop. He entered the hut and grabbed the woman's hood. He removed it hastily and pointed his flashlight at the woman's face. The scared woman could only cover her ugly face in fear. Because of the flashlight, she could not see the person's face at all. She could not understand why this was happening. "H-I-H." A scared voice escaped out of the woman's mouth as she heard the sound of the man's flashlight being dropped to the ground. She expected that she was about to get hurt and was about to curl herself in fear. Then, she was shocked even more. The man embraced her tightly. "Pearl, it's me." The man spoke near her ears. There was a moment of silence as she finally recognized the man's voice. Tears started to flow from her eyes. These tears were filled with sadness, guilt, and regret. She felt that she was not worthy of this embrace and such. She tried to push Edsel away. However, Edsel did not budge. He tightly embraced her without any sign of letting go. "Edsel, let go of me," Pearl begged. "Please, let go." "No," Edsel firmly declined. "No matter how much you reject me, I'm not letting you go anymore." Those words ignited Pearl's guilt even more. Tears overflowed from her eyes. "Just let me go. You don't deserve someone like me," she sobbed loudly. "I chose material things over you. My body had already been used by who knows how many men. I became ugly with these scars on my face and body. I'm nothing but a piece of useless trash of a wom." Pearl tried to tell Edsel about the degrading things about her and make him leave her alone. However, she was not able to finish her words. Her eyes opened wide as a kiss without any sense of disgust sealed her lips. Nevertheless, it did not make her happy. She felt even sadder. She could feel Edsel's feelings from this kiss. His feelings towards her never change. It would be a lie if she said that she did not like Edsel. However, she chose to be a slut who chose material things and comfort over staying true to her feelings. Edsel then slowly moved his face away from Pearl. The light from the oil lamp lit up her face, showing that ugly scar that went across it. There were also other small scars on her cheeks, chin, and forehead. However, none of those mattered to him as he wiped her tears. "No matter what you say, you won't be able to get rid of me." Edsel smiled. "I'm not the same as the past me. This time, I won't let go of you even if I die." Those words made Pearl speechless. She could tell that Edsel was not joking. She could not think anymore as his words pierced her heart. "You Pearl started to weep even harder than before. Edsel decided to no do anything but embrace her once more, letting her head rest onto his chest. ****. Are you really sure about this?" Just a distance away from the hut, two silhouettes could be seen talking under the shadow of the bridge. The two were closely watching what was happening. The two were no other than Mark and Pefile, Edsel's father. As Mark felt that Pefile appeared before Edsel, he could not help but head out to see what was happening. He did not expect that he would make Edsel and his traitorous girlfriend to reunite. Mark was against it at first. However, he started to think otherwise as he felt Edsel's genuine feelings towards Pearl. To Mark's question, Pefile sighed. "Sad to say, we are not human. Unlike humans, we live with only a single partner for the rest of our lives. Once we fall for a female, that feeling will stay for the rest of our life. Why do you think that some of us would even abduct females with husbands if we can settle for females without partners? Love is a treasure, but it is also a poison to us. If we fall for a female, we can only be with that female." Pefile turned to Mark. "You know, love can't always be manipulated. Many of our kind die because of this poison. If I did not do this, my son will die from his own." Mark looked at Pefile with a bit of pity. It seemed that there was more to this story as Pefile's emotions were everywhere as he said his reason. Day 70 to 10:12 p.m. Agos Bridge, Barangay Banugao, Infanta, Quezon. Inside the poorly made hut, Edsel continued to wrap Pearl in his embrace. She continued to cry until her eyes almost dried up. Not only her guilt and sadness but the tears that she was not able to let out in the times of her hardships flowed out. After she realized her faults, she resolved herself not to shed even a single tear no matter how she suffered. What happened to her and the rest of the things that came after was something she deserved. The karma that she must suffer after listening to the devil and following his steps. Because of that, even if she gave up several times and even tried to kill herself, she did not shed a single tear. Feeling Edsel's warm embrace filled with forgiveness and love, her tears flowed like water from a broken dam. She did not want to, but it just kept on flowing. It must have been the hardest she cried for her whole life. After she let everything out, she fell asleep wrapped in that warm embrace. Edsel caressed her hair, not minding how dirty it was. Looking at her face as she slept like a log, Edsel decided to just let her sleep. He did not mind staying in this place for the whole night. These people. Mark looked up. Although what he could see was the underside of the bridge, what he was gazing at were the soldiers above. It seemed that they were rather concerned about Pearl, especially the female soldiers. They probably knew about her circumstances and the reason she was living in this place rather than the temporary dwellings for evacuees. They were worried that Edsel might have ill intentions and was paying attention to what was happening under the bridge. However, hearing Pearl's cries and what she had said, it was not hard to realize who Edsel was. Some of the soldiers even shed a tear while listening as closely as possible. Still, eavesdropping was bad. With a sigh, Mark turned to Pephiel. What do you mean by love being poison to your race? It was a question he was curious about. Although he had a vague idea about it, it was still better to confirm the truth. Pephiel turned to Mark and he could sense his brimming curiosity. I will answer your questions, but at least give me a favor. What do you want? There was no hesitation as Mark asked that question. He was given an opportunity to learn about a race that normal people deemed non-existent. Who would want to pass this opportunity? It's not something hard, Pephiel said as he stared at the shabby hut. Take in Pearl as one of your people. Please, don't discriminate her for her past mistakes. That's pretty surprising, Mark said while leaning on one of the bridge's foundations. She betrayed your son, you know. I won't lie. I'm mad about her decision at that time. But, I think, she suffered more than enough because of that decision. That is why I want to give her another chance for my son. Well, your son is pretty much my underling now. If he wants Pearl, it's not like I will deny it from him. Mark replied, which made Pephiel's eyebrow twitch. Although what Mark said was not wrong, it ticked Pephiel a bit. All right, I already agreed. Answer my question now. Mark said with an annoying tone. It made Pephiel consider backing out of the deal. He could only sigh in resignation. When I said that love is poison to us, it meant both in a symbolic and literal way. The Tamawo was a race composed of only males. They might be a race that was naturally good-looking and had the charm that could make most women fall for them. However, that apparently had no value for a race that had no women. Without women, their race had no way to continue their lineage. Fortunately, they were a race that could procreate with most humanoid races. It did not only include humans but other spirit races. No matter what race the partner was, any male child born would have the blood of a Tamawo while every female would inherit their mother's race. If they had such ability to procreate with females of many humanoid races, they should have no problem maintaining their lineage. They could just make any female they were interested in fall for them and procreate. As they also had the magic to charm females, it would not be a problem if they took more than one wife. Unfortunately for them, the truth was harsher. The chance of a wife of a Tamawo bearing a child was rather low. Too low that it would not be surprising if a Tamawo could only have one child in his whole life. The most unlucky ones could not even have one. And the worst part, they could only choose one partner in their whole life. Unlike humans, whose love was more something like mental and physical attraction to the opposite gender, to the Tamawo, love was more to a spiritual level. Once they fell in love with a female, that love would bound their souls to that emotion. If they failed to end up with the female they fell in love with, even if they tried to forget, their souls would remember. For the rest of their lives, they would not fall in love with another woman. They would slowly lose their powers until they were not able to use it anymore. Once the woman they loved fell from the passage of time without fulfilling the love the Tamawo had, they would suffer from a backlash from their souls, harming them in the process. The mildest circumstance was the Tamawo losing his good looks and charms as his face shriveled like a plant that lacked water for ages. Their while shiny hair would fall in patches. Their skin would crack and hurt. For the worst part, they could die after suffering from turning into a shriveled spirit. Furthermore, there were even circumstances of some Tamawo that became evil spirits after losing the purity of their souls. It was because of these things that no matter how much they wanted their race to flourish, they were never able to. Compared to other spirits, their numbers were much lower. Asterisk asterisk. That's a bummer, isn't it? Your race is. Mark could not help but remark after hearing those things. What can we do? Pephile replied. Our race is created like this. It's not like we are born this way because we wanted to. A race of beautiful men that had troubles with procreation. It was such a unique story. They were gifted with one thing and forsaken with another. Many of us are really envious of humans. Those that turned into evil spirits took humans as primary prey because of that envy. Pephile added. About those effects. Mark said with confusion. Edsel looked fine though, aside from having a bit of depression. My son is still young. The blood of a Tamawo has not fully awakened in him yet. That is why it's still not late for my son to correct things. If it is not corrected though, he will start to feel the effects once he comes of age, the day of his adulthood. Pephile looked at Mark, who wanted more information. Unlike male children born from mothers that came from other spirit races, male children from human mothers are this way. They would only become a pure Tamawo once they reach adulthood. We don't exactly why, but we suspect that it is because of the humans, unlike spirits, had a looser bond to the string of fate. The bond to destiny is it? Mark nodded. It might also be the reason why spirit races had more rules they could not defy. They were closely bonded to the string of fate, the rules of the world. Unlike humans that had a looser bond to fate and were able to influence their destinies, the spirits races had no capability of defying these rules. This made them somewhat pitiful. Most humans might not have special powers like spirit races, however, humans were only bound by rules made by themselves. The spirit races were tightly bound by fate itself. Are you not envious of humans? Mark asked in curiosity. Although Pephile said that, he did not show any envy towards humans. I'm not as desperate as others. Pephile looked at Mark. If I have something to be envious of, it's you. Me? Mark was confused. The last time I saw you, you're a human not bound by fate. It's already strange. After a while that I did not see you, you don't even feel like a human anymore. You are now closer to demons and spirits but not bound by the rules they had. Your very existence is just unfair to everyone. In response to Pephile's complaint, Mark shrugged his shoulders. It was not like he wanted to be like this anyway. By the way, Mark suddenly spoke while looking at Pephile's whole body. You look good in your outfit. Currently, Pephile was wearing a black leather coat that highlighted his long white hair. It was paired with a red shirt inside, black slacks, and black boots. With his handsome looks, he looked like a protagonist from a fantasy action movie. He just lacked a cool-looking sword, probably something with a thin but unreasonably long blade. Hearing that, Pephile's face darkened. As a spirit, he was not used to wearing human clothes and had no idea what to wear. He just looked for something with consistent color and took it without any other thoughts. To think that he would be teased by a brat because of it. I'm leaving. Pephile decided. Please, take care of my son and his female. Say, why don't you stay with us? I don't know why you are hiding from your son, but isn't it better to look after him without hiding? Mark asked as Pephile turned to leave. I can't. I would like to, but I still had something else to do. Pephile replied as he started to walk away towards the nearby tree. Is it about Edsel's mother? Pephile froze on his step as he was about to touch the tree. I want to ask. Not minding Pephile's reaction, Mark continued. What will happen if a Tamawo fell in love with another Tamawo's wife? After he said that, Mark felt a strong reaction from Pephile. However, it seemed that he did not want to talk about the topic. Pephile immediately touched the tree and vanished as if he was sucked into it. Seeing Pephile leave, Mark shrugged his shoulders. What a troublesome race of creatures. He muttered. However, he could not deny that it was both romantic and sad depending on what angle one would look at. If the Tamawo succeeded in making a woman fall in love with him, they were bound to a happy partnership without any possibility of the man finding another woman. However, if the Tamawo did not succeed, they would suffer from their unyielding love. A poison indeed. Looks like Edsel will spend the night here. Mark said as he stretched his arms and back. I'll leave now, I guess. I'll check on that narcissist first before returning. With those words, Mark also vanished. Both Pephile and Mark left the place as if they were not there at all before. Asterisk asterisk. Is this what I'm lacking? Edsel muttered as he watched Pearl's peaceful face. Before this reunion, he only wanted to grow stronger. It was because he was weak that Pearl left him and did not want that to happen anymore. Looking back at those times, he realized. He wanted to grow stronger without even valuing his life. He just wanted to push forward without minding whether he was tired or hurt. Furthermore, he followed Mark's instructions like it was the law and without asking anything. He never declined or questioned him. No wonder now why Mark did not give him any task where he was alone. Now, looking at the scars on Pearl's face, his will to grow stronger was ignited further. This time, it was different. He did not want to grow stronger to prevent something. He wanted to grow stronger to protect something. I don't know, but it doesn't feel bad at all. Having something to protect, he should not fall and disregard his life. Growing stronger while protecting oneself. That way, he would be able to continue protecting what he wanted to protect. With those thoughts, a heavy weight was lifted from Edsel's heart. Day 71 to 7:01 a.m. New Infanta Settlement, Barangay Banugao, Infanta, Quezon. Since they reached the settlement, everyone felt more relaxed to rest for the night. Added that they arrived late, most of them ended up waking later than usual. It was even though the beds they could use here was way worse than those back at the mansion. What mattered the most was security for everyone to be able to relax enough. Mark, of course, was different. He was used to not sleeping too long, and his emphatic abilities would not allow him to sleep any longer. It was better during the night when most people were asleep. Once they woke up, however, the time that they all woke up was the time for Mark's sleep to get disturbed. Unfortunately, he could not leave the bed yet. It was because May clung to him firmly while she slept deeply. He did not want to disturb her sleep. As for the little girls, they were in the next room sleeping. Since these temporary dwellings were small, everyone would not fit inside one place. It became an opportunity for Mark and May to sleep together. Since he could not leave yet, he just decided to ponder about things. Before returning last night, he looked for the narcissist to see his current state. Then, he was surprised. Unexpectedly, Prince was isolated from the rest of their group. Since his face and manhood were ruined, his mind started to deteriorate. From being unable to satisfy the needs of his reigning trait, he was going crazy. It also caused him to faint every time he woke up. His mind could not keep up with his current state. Unlike others like Dominator, who longed for domination, and Herald, who wanted a higher position than everyone in his group, Prince's trait was more of a material one. Non-material traits like domination, loyalty, leadership, or being a socialite, they only needed to slowly fulfill these traits. Even if they failed once or twice, as long as they were alive, no restrictions were stopping them from achieving the goals of these traits. For Prince, however, no one would be able to fix his face. Prince, himself, knew that subconsciously. Because of that, his mind was like a computer program that was missing a crucial code to run correctly and ended up facing an error. When he checked on Prince, he was placed in a secure place in the laboratory. He heard from the workers there that Prince ran amok after waking up. It was different from before since he did not end up fainting, but had to be tranquilized. The soldiers had no choice to do so because Prince already showed signs of transforming into his mutator form to attack everyone around. As for being placed at the new laboratory, it seemed that the scientists wanted to know about something. One was the reason for the deterioration of Prince's mind. The other was the reason for his face to fester. For something, most likely wounds, to fester, there should be bacterial colonization on the infected area. That triggers the immune system to react, causing inflammation and tissue damage. It also causes serosanguineous drainage in the wound in most cases. What the scientists were baffled about was that most of the common harmful bacteria had gone extinct after mutagen invaded Earth. A lot of microorganisms were not able to contain mutagen and ended up being eradicated. If there were no bacteria to trigger the reaction Prince was having, what was happening? Mark could only shrug his shoulders learning about that. After all, it was all his fault. It was not like he was going to tell them what was happening. As such, he left. He already knew that it was the end for Prince. Even without him doing anything, he would end up dying by himself. Well, once that happened, Mark would be sure to be there. Prince was still a mutator. His personality might suck, but his mutator ability was still a high-level one. Mark would not let that one go to waste. UHN. While Mark was thinking, he heard the soft voice of someone waking up. He looked beside him and saw May, who was rubbing her left eye. "Good morning," Mark said, which made May's sleepy eyes look at him. Then, May closed her eyes and went back to sleep. She did not forget to snuggle closer to Mark as she did so. Mark smirked as she pinched May's nose, making her open her eyes abruptly. "Stop playing around. We still have to prepare things before we leave tomorrow." They already finished the mission given by General Perez. Furthermore, they finished it with an SS rating. IT should be SSS, but they had a few delays during the journey. Of course, all this nonsense was Mark's view of the mission. Mark's group could go to his base at any time they wanted. Immediately this day if possible. However, Mark had some business to finish before going back. First, he needed to attend a meeting with the officials of this settlement. There, he could gather some information about the surrounding areas of New Infanta settlement. He would also hand over the things that he was asked to deliver to the general. It was the research papers and the seeds of energy rice, developed by Sherville. Second, he needed to meet the Salvador family. He would not let go of the opportunity to bring them to his base. Annika's powers were too useful to pass by. They already told Mark their plans before, so he just needed to inform them to prepare. Next, it was about Kate's request to join. He would try to see the situation first before talking to her. Even though her trait might be a bit troublesome, she did not seem to be a bad person. Furthermore, Mark could tell that their group was already on the verge of disbanding. Harold was not satisfied with his group anymore, especially because of how he saw Mark's group. Mark's group was filled with usable and talented people while they only had imbeciles. Harold would surely abandon the people he made to rely on him. How savage. Lastly, and the most important thing, to meet Edsel and Pearl. It was bound to happen, and probably the first thing this morning. He already knew what it would be about, but there were some things he wanted to ask Pearl before accepting her. After Mark pinched her nose, May snuggled on his body, even more, making him sigh. "Don't go all dandier on me just because we are alone." Mark revealed a troubled look. "Dandier?" May asked, as she was not familiar with the term. "You're mostly silent and keep things to yourself. But you become like this when we are alone. That's what a dandier is." Hearing that, May blushed. She could not deny that all. However, she really liked snuggling beside Mark like this, especially when they were alone. Mark could sense what was going on in her mind. He could only sigh. "All right, I'll spend more time with you when we get to the base. Just bear with it a bit more." "Promise?" May looked at Mark with puppy eyes. "I promise. So, off the bed now." Hearing that, May immediately sat up and went to do things she needed to do. She looked as if she had not just woken up at all. Why do I feel like I've been cheated? Mark muttered as he watched May go out of the room to wake up the little girls. Asterisk 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 day 71 to 8:17 a.m. New Infanta Settlement, Barangay Banugao, Infanta, Quezon. They were having breakfast when Edsel arrived. Of course, he had Pearl with him. She looked too awkward and afraid. It was obvious that she was scared that she would be discriminated against because of her current appearance. It seemed that it had been a normal occurrence to her in this settlement and became engraved in her heart and mind. Boss. Everyone, good morning. Edsel greeted as he entered the room where Mark, May, and the little girls were eating. Aphelia, Amihan, Jaya, and Odalina with her children were also here. As for everyone else, they were in the proper dining area for breakfast. Since Mark was expecting Edsel, he decided to eat separately. It was not necessary to divulge Pearl's circumstance to everyone in the group. Boss, you see. After Edsel entered with Pearl, he was about to talk about the details. He was kind of awkward as he knew that Mark saw what happened to them before. Before he could continue, however, Mark cut him off. You don't have to say anything. I knew what happened. Edsel had a complicated expression. He did not know whether he should be surprised about this or not. On the other hand, Pearl felt even more scared. Mark spoke with a nonchalant expression. She felt that what Edsel wanted would not happen. Then, Mark turned to Odalina. Odal, bring the children out first. We have to talk about something. Without hesitation, Odalina brought the children out. Mark then turned to Pearl, who was covered with her ragged cloak while hiding behind Edsel. Step forward. Don't hide behind Edsel. Also, don't cover your face. The scared Pearl looked at Edsel, who nodded. Slowly, she stepped forward while holding Edsel's hand tightly. She then removed the hood of her cloak and swiped away her hair that covered most of her face. Mark and May had no reaction to her appearance. Of course, the others were shocked and felt pity. I want to ask, Mark spoke. What happened after you left with the Cristobal family during the evacuation in Eastport settlement before? Pearl shivered even more. It was a memory she did not want to remember anymore. She did not want to say what happened at all. You don't have to say the specific details. Mark knew what he should ask and what should not. Just tell what you can. Finally, she spoke. Asterisk 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 back then, she did not know much. However, during the evacuation, she heard that the Cristobal and Ruanto actually had a secret alliance. That was why the two families left together, abandoning everyone else on the verge of the disaster. There was not much infected on the road at that time. However, she noticed that the noise from their vehicles was actually attracting the infected nearby, causing them to block the road behind. When they reached the town in Dinahican, the vehicles stopped by the orders of former Mayor Jacob Ruanto. Then, the Cristobal family learned the awful truth. The alliance of Ruanto family to them were nothing but lies. The real allies of Ruanto family were the forces of Death Valley settlement. Thus, with their feudal resistance, everyone in Cristobal family was captured to become slaves, including Pearl. However, that was not the worst part. Trying to save himself, the young master of Cristobal actually tried to sell his girls off. That was when the first time she regretted her dumb decision. And the torture ensued after that. The men of Death Valley settlement were like hungry wolves. Inside the vehicles used to transport them, Pearl and the other women were already treated as toys for pleasure. Arriving at Death Valley, the torture for her became worse. As a young girl with good looks, a middle-aged woman had taken fancy on her. However, not because the middle-aged woman was a homosexual, but because she hated young women with good looks. At that short time, Pearl was taken under that middle-aged woman's roof. She let her boy toys play with her while she ruined Pearl's appearance slowly. Pearl could still hear the middle-aged woman's laugh even now in her sleep. The laugh she heard as she was being tortured using different devices. She heard the boy toys muttering about Pearl being killed afterward. At that time, she did not care anymore. But in the middle of her torture, gunshots echoed. The middle-aged woman escaped with her boy toys, leaving her chained in the basement. At that time, she passed out from blood loss. The next thing she knew, She was being transported by soldiers inside one of their vehicles while her wounds were being treated. Hearing this part, Mark nodded. It was something he knew. In fact, Mark still remembers the middle-aged woman Pearl was talking about. For sure, it was that cougar he bisected with her boy toys. In fact, Mark knew that Pearl was there all along in the basement as he took a Lola from the top floor of that building. However, how could he care for a slut like her? That was why he did not do anything and proceeded to do with the things he needed to do. Hearing all these, for sure, Pearl was just lucky to survive those things. Day 71 to 8:45 a.m. Temporary housing, New Infanta Settlement, Barangay Banugao, Infanta Quezon. Hearing Pearl's story made the women inside the room feel complicated. That feeling was even more complicated when it came to May and Jaya. They experienced being toyed with by men. May was lucky that Mark came to her rescue. Jaya, on the other hand, experienced it while her mind was already broken. They did not have the same experience as Pearl, but it was already enough to understand her plight. What made it even more complicated was because May and Jaya were both victims of misfortune. Pearl, on the other hand, was a victim of her ill choice. They did not know whether they should sympathize with Pearl or blame her for it. Then, the next part of the story was told by Pearl. She had been nursed back to health by the military as much as possible. It was the same for the other slaves with grave conditions after being rescued. Unfortunately, there was a problem that occurred. Those slaves, especially those with scars like her that could not be hidden, were outcasted by most of the survivors. Worse, female slaves were seen as dirty creatures. Being treated like a prostitute was one of the circumstances for them. For no proper reason at all, they became the way for those people to release their frustration about the outbreak and other things that happened after. There were even times that someone would throw stones at them just for fun. The military tried their best to remedy the situation. However, while there was an effect, it was very minimal. Because of those things, Pearl, who was already seeing herself as living trash, decided to live away from everyone. The soldiers warned her about living under that bridge being too dangerous. However, she did not care about that much. She tried killing herself several times. But for some reason, every time she had those thoughts, her knife would suddenly go missing. Furthermore, anything she could use to hurt herself would vanish. When no one was around, she even tried drowning herself in the river. However, after she passed out from the lack of air, the next thing she knew was that she was sleeping on her bed inside the hut. Pearl could live properly in the settlement, yet she could not die either for some reason. It was another level of torture. That was why Edsel's sudden appearance could be said as her only way out. Hearing everything, Edsel was clenching his free hand hard. It was all while the other hand held onto Pearl's hand as gently as possible. He looked at Pearl, who told the story. She barely even had an expression on her face. It was like she already resigned herself to be worthy of such punishment. This made his heart hurt. After Pearl finished telling everything, Mark finally asked the deciding question. "I'll ask you an important question," he said with a serious look. "Do you think that you deserve to be here?" Hearing that, Pearl shivered. Edsel could not help but gasp at that question, thinking that Mark would reject Pearl. With a deep breath, Pearl glanced at Edsel before answering. "I don't," Pearl said without hesitation. "Boss, she." Edsel tried to speak for Pearl, but he was interrupted by Mark raising his hat and stopping him from talking. Accompanied by a glare from Mark, Edsel could only swallow his words. "I don't think that Edsel will let you go, though. What are you going to do?" Mark asked another question. This question made Pearl look down with a defeated look. Edsel already said it last night, and her answer now. "I don't know. I don't know where should I start, but I will try my best to make up for everything." That answer made Mark smile. Pearl was being honest. She had no idea where to start. The only thing she could do was to do her best to make it up to Edsel and respond to his feelings. That smile on Mark's face made Edsel sigh in relief. Since Mark rarely smiled without a bloodthirsty aura, the smile he had right now surely meant a pleasant thing. Mark then flicked his right hand towards the two. Since two items came out flying, Edsel and Pearl could not help but flinch and close their eyes. However, nothing hit the two. As they opened their eyes, they saw two marble-sized crystals floating in front of each other. Pearl was confused and amazed at the same time with the show of sorcery Mark did. Of course, anyone not in the know would think of a floating crystal as nothing but a magic trick. Edsel, however, could not believe his eyes. He already saw these kinds of crystals around Mark several times. Of course, he knew what this meant. "Boss, are you sure about this?" Edsel asked as his hands shaking in excitement carefully caught the crystal in front of him. To Edsel's question, Mark shrugged his shoulders. "I had a different idea before, but that Sephiroth look-alike meddled because of that bloodline thing." "Well, you already learned and chose your purpose. I guess it's time for you to receive one. The one for her, just consider that as a gift." "Boss, thank you." Edsel conveyed his extreme gratitude and made Pearl catch hers quickly. "Edsel, also this," Mark said as he tossed a vial towards Edsel. The latter could not help but panic as he caught the bottle. Mark just tossed a valuable thing like nothing. Of course, anyone would panic trying not to let it fall and shatter on the floor. "Boss, this." Edsel was speechless. What Mark just tossed was a vial of regeneration medicine. "Give that to her together with the crystal. I don't know how much that will work, but I can't have her looking like that all the time." Mark then turned to Pearl. "Remember that Edsel is someone under me. Being with him meant that you are also under me. Do something undesirable and I won't hesitate to claim your life." Pearl shivered once more, however, she nodded. She just had to prove that she would be responsible for her conduct. "You two should go back already before I change my mind," Mark said while he shooed away the two. It was because Mark could tell that Edsel was about to ask about the man he met last night and led him to Pearl. Paphil's existence must remain a secret to everyone as much as possible. Some people here in this room would surely notice him lying if Edsel was to ask about it. Hearing that Mark might change his mind, Edsel hurriedly bowed in gratitude while urging the confused Pearl to leave with him already. Unexpectedly, before she stepped out of the room, Pearl looked back at Mark and respectfully opened her mouth. It was almost a whisper, however, it was easy to read her lips. "Thank you," she said. In the least, she did not forget to say that. "Bro, you're being generous today, aren't you? Can you also give me one of those crystals?" Jaya immediately spoke the moment Edsel and Pearl went out of the door. Of course, Mark only rolled his eyes on her. While it was true that he was being generous, it was just because he liked the way Pearl answered his question. If she tried to lie or butter up her words, it might have ended differently. Everyone was rather happy about Edsel though. They were all worried that the boy would not hesitate to throw away his life just to prove himself. After what happened to him when Pearl left him, he lost his self-worth. Now that they were reunited, a new Edsel was shown to them. It was way better than the Edsel that knew nothing but to find a way to become stronger. Finishing these things, Mark proceeded to do other things they needed to do. Unexpectedly, there was no need for Mark to inform the members of the Salvador family. Darren and Annika visited just before lunchtime came. They asserted their willingness to join Mark once more and said that they would get ready to leave as soon as possible. It really seemed that they did not find staying in this place appealing. Furthermore, it seemed that Colleen visited them and told stories about how the base was before they went to Bay City. This made their family even more eager. There was another thing. When Darren and Annika visited, the girl was holding onto something. "I almost forgot about this guy," Mark muttered as he poked the small tortoise the table. It was the only animal Mark noticed and took away from the army of mutated sea creatures that came ashore during the storm. The small tortoise that looked like it was made of plastic. If not for the fact that it was moving and responding to the people around it, anyone would think that it was a toy. "Yeah. You just left it to us like that," Annika said with a bit of complaint. Well, she was somehow eyeing May, who sat beside Mark. About this tortoise that was left to her, she did not know what to do with it. It was not hers, to begin with, and did not know if it would be appropriate for her to tame it. Unexpectedly, There was no need to. Compared to the mutated animals she tamed, this small and seemingly useless turtle was way smarter. On its own, it learned to respond to human words and gestures fast. Even the way that it responded to Mark right now showed that it remembered him saving it from the stampede of mutated sea creatures. "Can I turn this thing into a dragon?" Mark muttered as he poked on the belly of the tortoise after it accidentally overturned in its delight. Of course, everyone in the room looked at Mark incredulously. After lunch, Mark went onto the meeting with General Faustino and the other military officials. Professor Suzuki was also in attendance. Handing over the items, Mark also received what he wanted. Professor Suzuki was also inviting Mark to take a look at the new specimens they captured. However, Mark declined as they still need to do things for their departure tomorrow. If he came with this scientist, it would bound to a long journey inside the new laboratory. As the meeting was finished, Professor Suzuki suddenly left a remark. "Oh, save you I mean, Mark. There are some things waiting for you at your base, my niece told me." "What things?" Mark was confused. What things would that be for Alana to tell her uncle? "Haha, I won't tell you, you will know when you get back there." The crazy professor replied and he scurried away. Watching the professor run away, Mark sighed. "What is wrong with these people?" he muttered while scratching his head. As for what the scientist mentioned, Mark was sure that it would not be a bad thing. After all, Professor Suzuki did not seem troubled about it even though his niece was at that base. Still, Mark could not help but feel that the professor's words had some mocking and insult. Furthermore, Professor Suzuki was about to address Mark with something else but just cut it off. With that, the rest of the day passed and the news came to him. As he expected, Harold disbanded their group and even tried to urge Kate to go with him. The poor guys were left unable to do anything and not knowing what they should do next. As for Kate, she declined without hesitation. It made Harold quite angry. He left without saying much to her. Thus, Kate came to meet Mark and his group on her own and told that news firsthand. Mark had no problems with Kate joining, and after consulting Case and Kara, the two did not have problems too. In fact, Kara was glad to have Kate join. It seemed that one of the reasons Prince was not able to do much to Kara was Kate herself. Well, there was one problem that came up as Kate conversed with them. "Ah, fish!" Abigail shouted as she saw Kate. This caused Mark and May to have another short stare off. Mark could only sigh as May ended up embracing him from his back while staring Kate, asserting her dominance. Of course, Kate could only respond with a confused look. Day 71 to 10:21 a.m. Marikina Infanta Highway, Barangay Alas Asin, Santa Maria, Laguna. Early in the morning, Mark and his group left New Infanta Settlement. The officials of the military and even the soldiers that participated in the mission were in complete attendance to see them off. There was also Emika and her family. Emika and Mikio seemed to want to come along. However, they could not. Differently from when they arrived, the soldiers and their families were not with the group anymore. They were replaced by Pearl and the Salvador family joining the group. Unexpectedly, there were a few people that remained loyal to their family despite abolishing their power and joining the military settlement. Aside from the 5 members of the Salvador family, there were also 4 mutators with them. Of course, Mark had no problems with these 4 to join in. In fact, they already proved their personalities for being loyal to Darren's family even if they did not have any authority within the settlement. Mark also did not detect any ill intent from them. Rather, they seemed to be more excited as they looked at Mark like seeing a popular actor. They left New Infanta Settlement a few minutes after sunrise. However, the drive back alone was long. They just arrived at the barangay where they left Chaflar to guard the supplies could not carry anymore. There was a small town here in this barangay which seemed to be untouched since the start of the apocalypse. However, it seemed that the cause of deaths in this place were mutated animals than the infected. Traces of blood could be seen everywhere, but the dead bodies were almost non-existent. This was the difference between the behaviors of the infected and mutated animals. The infected might eat dead corpses on the spot, especially the biters. Still, they would leave a huge mess of an unfinished meal after they felt full. On the other hand, mutated animals were more prone to drag their meal somewhere safer or their nest before eating. That was the reason for the non-existent corpses in the area despite the traces of deaths almost everywhere. Reaching the place where they left the supplies taken from the mansion, they immediately saw the dragon sleeping like a log. As for the reason of its current state, just looking at the bones and blood scattered around the area, anyone would understand. "Hey, you lazy dragon." Mark started kicking Chaflar on its side to wake it up. Feeling something heavily hitting its scales, Chaflar annoyedly opened its eyes. Seeing Mark, it hastily opened its eyes wide and bounced back in surprise. The dragon was like a dog caught doing something bad. Well, Mark had no plan to blame it at all. Even though Chaflar was a reptile that did not need food too much, it would still love to eat. Back within the confines of the city, there was no way for it to eat live animals that could satisfy it enough. Being back in its natural habitat, it might have gone and hunt as much food as it could before falling asleep. Seeing that Chaflar was already awake, Mark spoke. "We're going to get some of the supplies, but you will stay here, all right? We'll be back for the rest of the supplies later. Guard this place properly." Seeing that Mark was not angry, Chaflar felt relieved. It nodded intently, though it just looked like a huge lizard bobbing its head. "Big brother, your dragon is really well tamed, isn't it?" Annika suddenly came to look at Chaflar. This made the dragon look at the girl since she was quite unfamiliar. "What I did with this dragon is different from your ability. Mine is only applicable to those intelligent enough. Your ability is more useful even to those with lower intelligence. So, expect that you will need to use that ability a whole lot at the base." Mark replied. "I don't mind. That is in exchange for our protection, right?" Annika said without hesitation. She knew her role well, it seemed. Mark looked at everyone loading as many supplies into the vehicle as possible. Because most of the people of the Salvador family knew how to drive, they managed to request 3 pickups from the military. This way, they would have more space to transport supplies. The loading of the supplies took longer than before. Without the soldiers, their manpower was severely lessened. Because of that, they decided to eat lunch first before continuing on the road. Of course, this time, the road was different. After leaving Chaflar behind once more, they entered a branching road going away from Marikina Infanta Highway. It was not a concrete road, however. It was a dirt road going up a hill and would lead to some of the most rural places in the area. The road was not too bumpy, however, it was still an uncomfortable ride. Because of the road going up and down, the speed of their travel was rather inconsistent. There was another road which was flatter and was more developed. They would have used that if not for the fact that they would need another hour or more of travel to get there, and the entrance to that road was way closer to the termite nest. This was the shortest route they could take right now. Along the uneven road, they encountered quite a number of mutated animals and insects. Nevertheless, aside for a few feral ones, most of them ran away at the sight of several vehicles in Giffer. As for those that tried to hinder the group, they would become the menu for dinner. Of course, the animals and not the insects. Even though the insects had already gone larger, not all people would want to eat these insects unless they were too desperate for food. Day 71 to 1:32 p.m. Makaira Daraitan Road, Madale Dile, Tanay, Rizal. After almost an hour at the dirt road, they reached Makaira Daraitan Road, the only road that would lead to Barangay Daraitan. It was the main road in this area. Nevertheless, despite being the main road towards Barangay Daraitan and the tourist spots nearby, the road was pretty much an isolated one. There were very few houses on the roadside and there was more flora to be seen along the way. Furthermore, there was barely any vehicle abandoned by the roadside. Most of the vehicles were even parked properly, which meant that the owners did not manage to use these vehicles to leave at all. Despite those, not a soul could be seen around. Not even a single infected on the streets. Nevertheless, Mark and the others managed to notice something odd. Mark went down the vehicle to investigate some stores they passed by. The very few stores on the road were rather looted cleanly. If it was obvious that the owners tried to keep their things, it would be fine. However, everything that was not edible or usable was still left. There was also the difference between the dust gathered on the tables and counters. If things were left untouched for a long time, the thickness of dust would rather look evenly spread. However, the spots where the dust was rather thin clearly left the mark where some food containers were placed before. This made it obvious that whoever took the items did it after a long while. Furthermore, in Mark's estimate, the thinness of the dust at those spots indicated that the items were taken not long ago. Probably a few days or so. Of course, it was still not sure. Maybe a week or more had passed already. It made everyone wonder if someone passed by this place in the same direction they were going. With those thoughts, they continued on the road. As they went deeper this isolated road, the sceneries had gone contrary to what they expected. The more they continued, the more structures and houses they saw on the roadside. Of course, it was quite understandable if anyone tried to think why. There is barely anything along the road. However, business and work opportunities exist at the ends of this road where tourist locations existed. Anyone who knew their priorities would surely live near these locations. However, it also meant that more animals present as these places were where they found more humans as food. Because of that, Mark and his group encountered more animals along the way. It was a pity that they could not carry any more carcasses and they could only leave the dead animals by the roadside. Still, Mark had to do some inventory sorting and made Giffer prioritize carrying more things than fighting. It was because some of the animals they killed had useful body parts such as spiny scales or hard shells. Even if these parts could not be used as weapons or armor, these could still be used for traps and other things. Midway, they finally reached the highest point they could go on this road. It was not because it was a dead end. In fact, Makira Daraiton Road still continued up the mountainous path. However, as they reached the forked road, they needed to take Daraiton Road that would go down the hill. This was the final stretch of road before they would reach the very same barangay where Mark first met Miracle and some of the Blood Children. Nevertheless, they noticed something which made them traverse the road more carefully. In the middle of the dust-covered road, footprints could be seen. Not animal footprints but footprints that belonged to humans. Furthermore, the footprints did not only belong to a single person but a group. As Mark investigated, there were 7 different footprints according to the print left from their shoes. It also seemed that they had traversed this road several times before, as the same footprints could be seen going different directions and at different times. It was very probable that these were the same people that scavenged the stores along the way. However, those stores were probably scavenged first, as Mark did not notice footprints in those areas. Even though they became careful, it was actually unnecessary. They did not encounter any ambush or humans along the rest of the way. After a few minutes, they finally saw the clearing, allowing them to see the mountain ranges in the northeast. In front of them, the part of the very same Agos River that flowed northwest of New Infanta settlement could be seen. Being a tourist location in a resort area, the scene by the riverside was soothing. Well, it was like that if they rule out the fact that they could see the wreckage of a large passenger plane just on the other side of the river. Unfortunately, they had no time to enjoy this scene yet. As such, the whole group crossed the river in their vehicles. There was a wooden bridge that allowed medium-sized and lighter vehicles to cross. As for the lorry, however, they had to make it across the shallow part of the river. The river was rocky, which made it easier for them to cross despite feeling uncomfortable. In the least, they did not get stuck because of mud. Finally, they entered the vicinity of Barangay Daraiton. Mark could not help but scratch his head. After they cleaned up this place during scavenging and training, it seemed that some people stumbled here. It looked like the owners of the footprints decided to live in this place while when he went off to fetch May and the others. Furthermore, there were more of them. From what he could detect, there were actually 30 people. They occupied the small elementary school northeast of the barangay. Well, he had no problems with it as long as they were not hostile. He would not hesitate to eradicate them if they made an idiotic move. Of course, the lookouts of the new group also spotted them. They were ready to fight in case Mark's group were to attack first. Still, they were hesitant as Mark's group did not look like easy pickings at all and more of a threat just with Giffer alone. Rather, they seemed that they did not want to fight at all. Seeing Mark's group was just passing by, the lookouts sighed in relief. Still, they were confused as to why a group of vehicles would go to a direction that was supposed to go up the mountains. Sure enough, these people thought of the road leading up to a base of survivors there. Exiting from the east side of Barangay Daraitan, they had to traverse a long dirt road along the rocky riverside. Seeing the end of that dirt road that was supposed to be a dead end, Mark smiled. Huey and the others surely did their job properly. A road that was not there before was properly made. It was one of the tasks he left for them since it would be troublesome to travel without a good road to traverse up the mountains. It was not the best kind of road, still, it was better than nothing. After 2 more hours of a bumpy ride and uncomfortable, Mark and his group finally arrived at the base between the 2 mountains. The scene there as they arrived, of course, made Mark scratch his head and frown at the same time. Day 71 to 5:22 p.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. Reaching the base located in a flat area between 2 mountains, everyone was already dead tired. There might not be that too many battles along the way. However, just the rough new road out of Barangay Daraitan leading to the base drained out their energy because of the very bumpy ride. When everyone saw the base, they could not help but feel amazed. Tall reddish-black walls surrounded the base. Above the walls, many odd-looking crossbow-like weapons were mounted. If that was not intimidating enough, the spikes protruding from the walls would surely frighten people enough to make them stay away from these walls. This is not just a base, it's more of a fortress. Those words were what currently occupied their minds. As for Mark, he felt rather proud of the base after seeing their reactions. The foundations of this base were laid out by him, after all. Still, his proud feeling could not appear on his face at all as he frowned deeply. The exterior of the base was all excellent and was even improved. However, what was with the 2 tent villages outside the southern gates? It was already surprising to find out that Barangay Daraitan was currently being occupied by a group of survivors. Yet, what was with this situation? These 2 tent villages were set up with temporary huts separated by the road going towards the gate. By size, the people on the west side of the road numbered to 32. On the east side, however, there were 97 individuals. The people on the west side looked really odd. By their appearance and the atmosphere around them, they seemed to be belonging to an indigenous tribe. On the other hand, the larger group on the east side, many of them wore rags. They all looked normal citizens. Since several vehicles arrived up the rough road, the people in the temporary huts were alarmed. They all went out of their dwellings to see what was going on. Amazement could be seen on their faces as they saw the sci-fi-looking vehicles leading the convoy. Of course, seeing Giffer, many were shocked that they ran into hiding. Then, a commotion could be heard from the base. Hurriedly, the gates opened. This seemed to have surprised the people on the east side of the road. As the gate opened, several people went out with brightened faces. They were no other than Mark's direct subordinates left to lead the base. Huey, Jolene, Trisha, Ed, Ron were here. Along with them, Mark's friends, Hallie, Nicole, and Alana, also came. Unexpectedly, Aaron, Naomi, and Tulia, the slaves that were saved from Death Valley, were also present. It was not hard to tell why they came out. Even without communication, it would be impossible for them not to recognize the same material used on the vehicles. After all, it was the same material used with the walls and weapons they had. Seeing the vehicles modified with blood metal only meant that Mark had returned. Their eyes lit up even more as they saw Mark going out of the vehicle leading the convoy. "Boss! Mark!" The group coming out of the gates yelled in unison and greeted. Mark nodded at their greetings and faced Huey, who served as the temporary leader while he was not around. "What happened? Why are there people outside?" Mark asked while glancing at the people in the surroundings. Hearing that question, Huey sighed. Actually, boss, we don't know either. According to Huey, this situation happened too suddenly. The tribesmen seemed to have arrived first just a few days after Mark left with Miracle, Colleen, and Edsel. Since Mark made a very strict rule to not let any outsiders to the base, Huey did not let them in. Since the only way for them to enter was Mark's permission, Huey told the tribe that they have to wait for Mark or could just leave if they wanted to. Nevertheless, they insisted on staying to meet Mark, who was the owner of this base. They did not seem to be bad people, and that was why Huey and the others actually helped them make temporary dwellings for them. These tribesmen even helped with farming on the north side of the base in exchange for extra food and clothing. Since there were no problems with that, Huey and the others gladly accepted their proposition. These tribesmen seemed to have some odd customs. Still, they were good people to work with. As for the group on the other side, they suddenly appeared about 5 days after the tribe arrived. Furthermore, they arrived with a bit of commotion. Apparently, this group arrived midday after the hornet nest northwest of the base were disturbed. Furthermore, when these people arrived, a lot of them were wounded, especially the ones wearing rags. Furthermore, some of the people from this group tried to infiltrate the base one night. Of course, with Huey guarding the base entirely, there was nothing that could escape his ears within the base. The intruders were eliminated without mercy. There were 7 intruders and 4 among them were mutators while the remaining were evolvers. Unfortunately for them, their abilities were no match to the defenses of the base. They were killed even before they could climb over the walls. When the other people from their group were questioned, they denied their involvement with the intruders. Since there was nothing that could serve as evidence, Huey could only maintain close guard towards that group. "All right, good work." Mark tapped Huey's shoulder. "It's nothing, boss. We need to protect this place or we won't anywhere else to go." Huey replied. While the greetings were happening, some people from the vehicles also came out. "Bessie," Colleen shouted as she embraced Alana. "Look who's here." Colleen pointed at the person following behind her. "Mizuki. Long time no see." "Lynn," Alana shouted at Annalyn in glee as the two embraced each other. Mark was rather surprised hearing what Annalyn called Alana though. However, asking about that would come for another time. "Gerger, who are the enemies?" May, who also followed behind after Colleen and Annalyn, approached Mark and whispered. Sure enough, her appearance as she came out of the vehicle caused the world to still a bit. Everyone in Mark's group was already used to her appearance. The others who saw her for the first time were surely not. What was unexpected was her question to Mark. She even had her sniper rifle and submachine guns with her. It seemed that she realized what Mark's frown meant. It was not only because there were people outside the base, but it was also because of something else. "Huey, can you guys stomach killing people like animals?" Mark asked, which snapped everyone out of their trance at May's appearance. Still, the question made them shiver a bit. There was not a bit of joking on Mark's tone. While the others hesitated to answer, 3 people nodded. "Boss, I can if needed." "Me too, no problems with me." Jolene, Hallie, and Alana replied respectively. It was quite surprising that these 3 women were the ones to reply. However, it was enough. Nodding, Mark gave his orders. "You 3 go up the walls and man a needle launcher each. When I start, shoot all those that try to fight." Hearing those orders, the 3 left without hesitation. Alana took along Annalyn and Colleen while Hallie pulled Nicole with her. "Mayor, you also go up the walls. I'll do most of the things here," Mark said to May. "Okay," May replied and embraced him a bit before following behind Colleen. "Huey." Mark turned back to Huey, who was a bit confused as to why Mark seemed to be releasing bloodlust right now. "Guide everyone inside. Also, let the tribe enter. I'll speak to them later." Huey nodded as Mark signaled the vehicles to enter the gates. Still, he was surprised and glad that the tribe received the permission to enter. When Huey informed the tribe about their entry, everyone was all smiling. Finally, they received what they had been waiting for all this time. As the tribe took out their very few belongings, they were escorted inside the base. Among the tribesmen, an old woman took Mark's attention as the younger tribesmen helped her walk. On the other hand, the old woman was also staring at Mark even though her eyes seemed to be already bad. It was questionable how she was able to look at Mark at this distance. Furthermore, the old woman nodded at Mark with a respectful greeting. Mark could tell that the old woman was strange and possibly a psychic. As the old woman did not harbor any ill intentions, it was fine to let them in for now. Of course, the act of letting the tribe in caused some disturbance towards the other group. While everyone entered the base, Mark stood in place watching them. It was when he was approached by some people. "Sir, are you perchance the leader of this base?" A bald man with a bushy beard and had a shotgun strapped on his body asked while trying to be as respectful as possible. Mark turned his head back looking at the man sideways. "You're mistaken. I'm not the leader of this base. I'm the owner." The rude and unfriendly tone Mark gave out made the representatives of the group make stiff expressions. Mark's manner already showed it. They were not welcome in this place. However, they could not give up. If they could enter this place, they would not have problems looking for a place to live anymore. "Sir, we saw that you let that tribe enter. I wonder if we could too. It was very dangerous for us to stay outside." The man tried to persuade Mark. However, Mark's response to that was a chilling smile. "Before everything else, I want to ask you, people, something." Mark finally faced them. Yet, they felt more uncomfortable for some reason. "What is it, sir?" The man replied. "As long as we could answer, there would be no problem." "I'll ask then." Mark's smile became even more chilling. "How many slaves did you people sacrifice to get here?" That question alarmed them all as they all took a step back. The bald man even tried to retreat far from Mark as he was the closest. However, he was not able to as Mark's hand grasped his neck. "Let me go." The bald man struggled and tried to pull his shotgun. "Unfortunately for you people." Mark paid the guy no mind. "I don't plan to let the dregs of Death Valley enter my place." The bald man's eyes became wide. Snap, his neck was bent in an unsightly angle as his body went slump on Mark's right hand. Mark then threw the corpse of the bald man away like throwing a bag of garbage into a bin. Seeing one of them die, the others immediately pulled their guns to point at Mark. However, bang, 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 SHOOV, SHOOV, SHOOV. Their fates ended there. The men around Mark had either their heads exploded by May's sniper rifle or riddled with holes by the girls that manned the needle launchers by the wall. "Ah!" Screams ensued as the group that approached Mark was killed in the blink of an eye. Of course, all these screams only came from those people dressed in pitiful rags. As for the other members of this group that were the remains of Death Valley settlement that managed to escape, the mutators started to exhibit their abilities to counterattack while many of the ones dressed in rags decided to run away. Unexpectedly, despite how scared they were, many remained on the place covering their heads. These ones had no energy to run at all as the slave owners prioritized themselves for the food and water they had. Finally, Mark gave his orders. "Don't shoot the ones wearing rags. As for the others, kill them all." Day 71 to 5:48 p.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. Mark stood in front of the mutators and evolvers alone. This prompted the enemies even more to do a counterattack. Activating their abilities, they charged towards Mark first as it would be harder to approach the girls atop the walls of the base. Unknown to them, their movements were just as Mark planned. Mark decided to deal with these people by being alone outside. It was not because he alone was enough to deal with these people. In fact, it would be easier to end this if Mark let the others fight alongside him. Nevertheless, it would also prompt the enemies to retreat and run towards the forest. It was already getting dark. Although Mark would not have a hard time finding these people even if they ran away, it would still take more effort. If these people scattered in different directions, it would cause some of them to have the possibility to escape. Since Mark was alone, they thought that with their numbers, they could take him down alone. Or maybe, Take him as a hostage to stop the girls on the walls from firing their weapons. That was the worst, maybe, of their lives. Mark looked at the enemies coming towards him. He was scrutinizing the abilities they displayed. Some of them had claws. Other enemies had animal parts on their bodies, while a few had transformed their skin into some like metal. However, one ability took Mark's interest. A man stood steadily in the middle of their encampment. He was waving his arms with precision as he deflected every large needle and bullets coming towards him. A wide 1-meter-long blade could be seen protruding from his right arm, and his left had deformed and turned into a shield. Furthermore, unlike the others that were in a state of panic, the man was still calm. It was more like he did not even care whether he would die or live here. Or maybe, he had the confidence that he was capable enough to escape this. Mark could tell, the man's ability was rather unique. It would not be surprising if he had such confidence. Unfortunately, Mark and his group were not your typical survivors. Even among mutators, the abilities of people in Mark's group was top-notch. Other than the man with a blade and shield, there was another who transformed into something looking like an insect. His whole body was covered with green-colored exoskeleton which emphasized his lower limbs. He jumped around fast, which made it hard even for May to actually hit him. Lastly, Mark noticed a bear. There was nothing else that could describe that enemy than being a bear. A tall man with huge muscles covered in dark brown fur. What else could be but a bear? Aside from them, there were others with notable abilities. However, they were not as eye-catching as the three. Finally, the attackers reached and surrounded Mark. In response to their attacks, Mark danced. He tapped his right foot on the ground, causing red-orange flames to ignite around his foot. The attackers were surprised. However, they could not stop in their charge anymore. With a spin, Mark mauled those that were too close to him with his right foot. In every hit, the flames around Mark's foot would explode. It caused those that were hit to fly back depending on which part of their body was hit by the kick. There were also those that were hit on their face. Among them, 3 died immediately as parts of their heads exploded. There were still those that managed to dodge. Not like Mark would let them go easily. As for those that took the opportunity to attack after that kick, Mark kicked the ground, spinning in the air, dodging them. As Mark spun, his flaming foot created a circle of flame. Ending that circle, his foot dropped onto the head of a man with large claws. The man's head ignited into flames and he fell down. He wanted to roll and extinguish the flames. However, Mark's spinning drop kick left him with a concussion. Dizzy and unable to do anything, he died as Mark's foot dropped onto his neck. While Mark slaughtered these ignorant insects, Mark suddenly turned his back from their main encampment. Clang! A loud metallic sound echoed as Ignis that hung on Mark's back was hit by something metallic. Following that sound, the new attacker tried to bash Mark with his shield. However, Mark already jumped away while killing another 2 enemies. The bash missed, leaving the attacker with a frown. When Mark turned to face the attacker, he saw the man with a pear blade and shield. Like before, the man's face was calm. "Tell me, how did you know that we are from Death Valley?" The man spoke. "Why won't I?" Mark replied with a smile that confused everyone around. Then, his words fell, which shocked these men. "I'm the one that destroyed that garbage dump. Don't you know, Spy Captain?" The calmness from the man's face vanished as he heard what Mark called him. There was no doubt that the man realized who Mark was. "So, you're that person they were talking about before I cut off my communications from them." It was not hard to tell who was the man talking about. For sure, he was talking about the other spies sent to Death Valley and the soldiers of the military. As for why Mark recognized these people, although he would not heed any mind on miscellaneous people whose mental energy he felt before, he would remember them once they appeared in front of him once more. He was very sure that he felt the fluctuations of most of these people in Death Valley during the moment before it was destroyed. It just meant that they managed to escape the destruction of Death Valley settlement and the military. However, they brought themselves to the lion's den to be slaughtered mercilessly. It was not like they deserved any mercy though. "Well, we won't die without a fight, everyone attack." The former espionage captain yelled at his comrades. Hearing that exchange by the two, the other enemies felt even more desperate. They did not hold back anymore and used any means for attacking. Whether it be their abilities or their guns, even if they did not have much ammunition left. It was all or nothing for them now. Bang! A pistol was fired from the enemy's side. However, Mark was not the target. The bullet flew towards Alana on top of the wall. The shot was too sudden and there was no time for Alana to take cover. Bang! Ting! The bullet did not reach Alana, however. May's eyes dilated, activating her bullet time. The bullet was still fast, but not in a way that it could not be seen. May fired her sniper rifle, deflecting the incoming bullet. "Thank you," Alana said to May. She did not seem to be fazed by what she was about to experience just now. Alana then proceeded to pierce holes on the person that shot at her like a crazy person. It might not look like it, but her mind was surely affected by the near-death experience just now. Because of that instance, the girls atop the walls focused on shooting those that had guns on their hands. Then, the girls faced another unexpected attack. A huge tree was hurled towards their direction. The tree was uprooted and was thrown by the bear. There was no doubt, he was really a bear. Furthermore, he was not done yet. He threw another uprooted tree towards the girls just to be sure and was in the middle of uprooting another one. The girls were in trouble. There was no way for any of them to block these large trees hurled at them. Then, a white shadow charged past them from behind. The wild shadow kicked the air fast, which caused the shadow's speed to accelerate. Bam! The shadow spun forwards and dropped her heels on the incoming tree, causing it to fall down. With that kick, the shadow stopped midair, revealing Abigail in her transformed appearance. Alana and Hallie gasped at the appearance of a cute cat-eared little girl in front of them. It was despite that they were still in the middle of a battle. The priorities of Oedicus, despite the situation, were really odd most of the time. Before they could take a proper look at Abigail, she already kicked the air once more and charged towards the other incoming tree. The intervention of the trees gave some of the enemies some time to shoot at May and the other atop the wall. However, not only that the girls were ready to take cover this time, a barrier was erected in front of them, blocking all of the incoming bullets. Both Iola and Miracle also came to assist. Not only the little girls, Edsel, Odalina, but even Edwards also came to provide support. As expected, a former military soldier had better gun skills than Colleen. After Edwards appeared, he managed to gun down several people already. It was obvious, the people from Death Valley were on the verge of defeat. Many of the remaining ones decided to run away already. Unfortunately for them, May prioritized herself on shooting those people. Even if they were already a distance away, as long as they were within her sight, they would fall with a bloody hole on their bodies. They were efficiently dealing with the situation. Even Abigail was doing fine as she contended with the bear. Still, there seemed to be no way for the little cat girl to win alone against that giant bear. As such, another two came that made both Hallie and Alana gasp once more. A gray-colored wolf teen and a gray tabby-colored catboy joined into the fight with the bear. Their teamwork was awful, especially since the two cats were rather wary of the wolf. However, the three of them fighting the bear caused the bear to fall onto a disadvantage. Mark, on the other hand, already disposed of the weaklings around him. The only ones left around him was the spy captain and the armored grasshopper. He could only shake his head though. It seemed that everyone was itching for a fight and just timed their entrance properly. He started to wonder if they understood his intentions for staying outside alone. Clang! Another loud metallic sound echoed as Mark wielded Ignis and clashed with the spy captain. Mark could have ended it faster. However, since the others already participated in killing a lot of the enemies, he decided to play a bit with his prey. After the clash, Mark was forced to jump back. It was because the grasshopper man jumped towards him. The teamwork of the two was rather flawless. It was not like Mark was afraid of getting injured. However, he did not want his clothes ruined because of this fight. Annoying. Mark spat as he blocked another slash from the spy captain. Then, clang! Ignis slipped out of Mark's hand as he was overpowered by the slash of the spy captain. Seeing Mark lose his sword, the spy captain had an excited look on his face. However, that look did not last. Ah! A painful yell echoed by their side, which made the spy captain look by reflex. There, his eyes opened wide as he saw the grasshopper man covered by black flames while being impaled by Ignis on his chest. The grasshopper man fell on the ground lifeless. Then, Ignis shook as it pierced through the grasshopper man's body before returning to Mark's hand. You! The spy captain was speechless. For sure, the sword slipping out of Mark's hand was on purpose to catch the two off guard. The sword did not slip and hit his comrade, but sure enough, flew towards Grasshopper Man's chest like how it flew towards Mark's hand. "Oh, by the way, you're the only one left," Mark said, which made the spy captain look behind him. Aside from a few slaves that could not run away, everyone else was already dead, while a lot of slaves escaped on their own. Even the bear was defeated by 2 children and a young man already. While he was moping for their defeat, he heard a whisper. "Say hello to Satan for me." With those words, the spy captain's sight spun like a Ferris wheel as his head flew off after being separated from his body. All right, time for harvest. That was the last thing the spy captain heard before everything went black. It seemed that they were nothing but livestock to the eyes of the enemy. Day 71 to 6:17 p.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. Horror. That was what the remaining slaves felt as they saw Mark behead the corpses of mutators in front of them. Putting the heads inside a sack soaked with blood, anyone who did not know Mark would surely feel horrified. Still, they were a bit confused as to why Mark seemed to be only picking some bodies to behead while leaving the others. Nevertheless, that did not make Mark any less scary. One thing that made the slaves felt relieved, however, was knowing that Mark and his group were not just demons that would slaughter just anyone. The slaves were left there without any harm. Well, of course, it would be different for those that ran away. With how dangerous these forested mountains, especially during the night, they surely would not live for tomorrow. Unfortunately, it seemed that Mark had no plans to just take these slaves into his base. They were not dangerous to take in. However, they were not loyal to Mark and his people, unlike the others. The most that Mark could do for them was to feed them tonight and escort them out of this place tomorrow. If some wanted to join Mark's base, he would evaluate them first before agreeing. As for those that were not, they could leave without any issues. "Jaya, can you hear me?" Mark spoke in his mind, calling for Jaya that already entered the base. "I can. Big bro needs something?" Jaya replied immediately. "Tell Aphelia to go here and bring out the garbage cleaner. We need to clean this place before the smell attracts animals and wandering infected." It did not take long for Aphelia to come out of the gates with Logan. Thus, the slaves were subjected to another round of mental torture. Most of them could not help but feel their stomachs churn as they saw Logan chew on the dead remains of the enemies. Mark, on the other hand, watched this to see if there would still be any effect on Logan. Sure enough, Logan was able to use the mutations of the already beheaded mutators. However, the strength was way lower compared to when it ate everything, including the heads. After eating the body of the grasshopper man, Mark told Aphelia to make Logan transform. Logan did cover its body with a green exoskeleton. However, the strength of armor did not even reach half of the mutator was capable of using. It did not take long, the insatiable Logan finished its meal. The smell of blood was still there, nevertheless, it was considerably lessened. Leaving the scared slaves, Mark entered the gates with Abigail, Jester, Case, and Aphelia, who controlled Logan. The sun already set halfway by the time Mark entered the gates. There was barely any daylight left to see the appearance of the base. Still, as a mutator, Mark's enhanced sight allowed him to see the changes from when he left the base and now that he returned. The difference was rather huge. The huts from before, like the hut he used as a workshop, were nowhere to be seen anymore. What replaced the wooden, roughly built huts were properly built sheds made of reddish-black metal. Even the other structures and houses were properly made following the outline they drafted. There were even places to house guests and temporary housing which looked like a one-floor dorm placed near the gates. The parking area was also made just beside the gates where their vehicles were properly parked. It was good that Mark's mentality in playing games made him decide for a larger parking area. Due to it, all their vehicles managed to park and the parking area still had a good amount of free space available. As for the river that ran at the east side of the base, it was properly secured with fences. Mark felt odd, however, seeing a small structure near the spring. He could tell that the mermaid he found was inside, and was afraid about the gunshots that were heard during the battle. Still, it seemed that she had been living well. She seemed to be in a far better state than when he found her. At the center of the base was a large clearing that could be used for many things. It could be a resting area or an area for open meetings. Mark had thought of this the same way he thought about the parking area. Just like how Mark plays civilization building games where he always left city centers as an open plaza. Mark walked inside the base and met with everyone. Sure enough, they were amazed, which made Huey and the others proud of their work. The creation of blood metal used for construction was Nicole, Hallie, and Alana. The three already managed to bond with a bloodchild for each of them. As for the construction, Huey and Ed led it while those that were not working on the farm and other things were helping them. For everyone that had just arrived, including Colleen, Edsel, Amihan, and Aphelia, this place was not just a base. It was an actual fortress in the middle of the mountains. As for the only place untouched by the changes, it was Mark's precipice. The face of the tall cliff he dug to make his own house. Since Mark wanted to build this structure himself, he strictly told Huey to leave it be. They were allowed to enter the main areas where the infected were being kept, but the other parts were off limits. Since it was already getting dark, they decided to do everything else for tomorrow. As such, everyone decided to go find where they would stay for the night while the others prepared for a good celebration for Mark's return with his group. In their perspective and struggles since the start of the apocalypse, it would not be easy to traverse a long way filled with dangers just to find and bring back the people you valued. That was why they decided to celebrate. Luckily, it seemed that with the help of the tribe, Huey and the others managed to hunt a mutated cow. Unfortunately, it was a feral one to be kept as livestock, and thus, they decided to cook it tonight. Their return was perfect timing for a delicious meal for dinner. While everyone prepared, Mark with May decided to do one thing first. It was to meet the elder of the tribe. Since the tribe was small, they only needed 3 small rooms for everyone to properly sleep. The beds might not be too classy but were way better than sleeping on tufts of grass covered with cloth. It seemed that the tribe already opened up to Huey and the others and were not that awkward inside the base. Some of them already fell asleep on their beds as their fatigue for more than 2 months of struggles through the forests and mountains caught up to them. Their journey filled with dangers and sadness was finally over. Even when they arrived for quite a while already, staying outside did not give them the least bit of sense of security. Inside the walls, however, they could finally sleep without worries. Mark led May to the area where the tribe was brought into by Huey. When the tribesmen saw Mark approach, they unexpectedly kneeled down in respect. He could not tell whether it was just a courtesy from the tribe or if this gesture had other meanings. Nevertheless, he decided not to bother too much about it and proceeded to the door leading to the room of the elder and her grandchildren were staying. Mark was about to knock when he heard the lock on the door was removed. He could not help but retract his hand and let the door open. There, a girl about 16 or 17 opened the door. "Please, enter," the girl said nervously. Grandmother expected you to come." She stepped aside letting Mark and May enter. On the bed, an elder sat with her eyes closed while a young boy fed her some porridge that they seemed to have prepared earlier before Mark and his group arrived. The elderly woman then signaled the boy to stop feeding her and faced Mark, who stood by the door. "I had been waiting for you, Savior." The elder spoke with her old and a bit hoarse voice. Yet, somehow, her voice sounded clear to the ears of those that heard it. Still, Mark could not help but frown. No wonder Professor Suzuki was making fun of him. No one told him about this either. For him to be called a savior, he was not worthy. Such an address should go to those with a hero complex to save everyone they wanted to save. Not for a person who would not hesitate to kill like him. Sensing his mood, the elder spoke once more. I'm sorry, I should not have addressed you in such a way if I knew that you would dislike it. Mark, just call me Mark, he spoke. What is this savior thing that you just said? Why would you call me with that? Of course, Mark would ask that. To his question, the elder smiled. There is no other reason actually. I know you feel that I'm just not a normal person. Yes, I am not. I am the leader and the seer of our tribe in this generation. The elder tried to open her eyes to look at Mark. However, sure enough, she could barely see anything. A seer, Mark repeated. So, you can see the future? Hearing that, the elder shook her head. Unfortunately, a seer like me is not that capable. I can only see signs about things that I needed to know. Just like I ended up calling you Sir A. Savior. From the signs given to me, we found this place. It was because the person that could lead the remaining of our tribe to salvation should be in this place. And that is me, isn't it? Mark said, which the elder nodded to. I can't be mistaken. You are the person that the signs had told me about. The elder then squinted her eyes as she looked at Mark. My eyes could already be bad. However, I can still see that you and that woman behind you are different from most people on Earth. Mark fell silent while May grasped his hand as she intently listened to the elder. Everyone in the world is shrouded by the energy called fate. The destiny that dictated the outcome of their lives. The string that pulled them into the events that happened in their lives. Everyone had differences. Some might be strongly shrouded by fate while others were weakly shrouded. Some could not defy it no matter what, and some could defy and direct it to some extent. There are also those like me who can foretell it to some extent and avoid our impending doom. The elder then alternated her stares towards Mark and May. You two did not have a shred of it. There is no doubt that you two could only be our saviors, especially you, Mark, was it? The elder then looked at her grandson and caressed his head with a sad look on her face. Our world is already destined to doom. That is what I saw from the signs. Even those monsters that were previously humans are still bound to fate. Who they attack, who they eat, where they wander, and where they trip. It might look random, however, they were only following what fate dictated. They were only enacting what fate had dictated for us. The only ones that could save us are those not bound by these chains. You're not telling me to save the world, are you? Mark asked. To that question, the elder shook her head. It's already late for that. The world was already facing destruction since all these unfortunate events started. The only places that would be safe were those places where people like you had influence over. Like this place. That is why. I beg you to let our people live here. The elder lowered her head towards Mark and May. Both the girl and the boy followed the gestures of their grandmother. Day 72 to 8:12 a.m. Moton Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. The night had passed after Mark spoke to the tribe elder. He decided to let them stay. Having a seer in his base was not detrimental to them. In fact, an existence like the elder was more reliable than his clairvoyance. That would be activated without his control. Although the elder's clairvoyance was a bit obscure in its predictions, it was more active than his. That was what he needed. He and May also listened to the elder tell their origins. Unlike other psychics that managed to gain their abilities accidentally like Mark and Jaya, her clairvoyance ran on the blood of their family. Before the current seer faced their death's door, they needed to pass on their ability as a seer to a successor. The successor should be a female direct descendant from the seer's family and should be of adult age. That should be the normal way for them to pass on the leadership of the tribe and their seer. The female child of their family would become the seer while a male child would take on the role of the tribe chief. Unfortunately, there was no possible successor for the elder right now. Her children all passed away during their journey from Baguio towards this place. They died along with other members of the tribe when they were attacked by mutated animals several times in their journey. Sadly, the only ones left in the elder's family were her two grandchildren. The little boy, Gani, was just an 11-year-old. As for the granddaughter, Mayumi, she had just passed her 17th birthday 3 months ago. Both of them still did not fit the right criterion for the positions that should have waited for them. However, as they intended to go under Mark's leadership, Gani would not become the tribe chief anymore. As for Mayumi, she would still need to inherit the elder's position and become the next seer on her next birthday. Thus, the elder still needed to wait for several months before she could pass on peacefully. That was right, the elder might be avoiding the topic since her grandchildren were around. However, Mark could tell. Her time in this world had long been over. The aura of death was rather too strong around her. However, it seemed that not being able to pass their position as a seer prevented her from passing on. Somehow, Mark had the thought that it was rather similar to folklore stories about Aswangs and Monongal. There were stories about them where Aswangs would not be able to die of old age or sickness if they did not give their powers to a successor. It might be similar, but Mark could not sense that kind of atmosphere from the elder. There might be some similarities. Nevertheless, the elder and her grandchildren were surely human. If not, not only Mark, even Emihan would sense it. With those in mind, Mark stretched his back as he helped with moving the things out of their vehicles. The supplies and weapons they got from the mansion, the things they brought from Bay City, and most importantly, the gaming consoles Mark brought back from different places. Prioritizing the gadgets he had, Mark and May moved them into his house. As Mark had thought, the night here in the mountains was way colder than in the city. Especially last night, everyone had to adjust to the drop in temperature. Nevertheless, it was a rather comfortable night. Since the blood children had not seen Mark for a long time, they had been longing to be around him. As such, their warm bodies served as a heater for him, May and the girls. The bed he prepared was large, yet it still felt cramped because of that. Even right now, while Mark was working, the blood children were around watching his movements. They were thoughtful enough not to disturb his work. Well, aside for Alaula, who would still jump towards Mark if not for Crimson holding her back. After moving the things out of the vehicles, Mark with a small team from his group would go out to retrieve the supplies they left with Chaflar. There was also the supplies left behind at the mansion. They also needed to pick those up as soon as possible. Master, where should I put these? Odalina stopped by to ask while she held a large box filled with things Mark collected. Put it inside the first room on the right after entering. Mark replied. The contents of that box were things he collected from the remains of the animals, insects, and even mutated infected they encountered during the journey. It was only reasonable to put these items inside his workshop. Since Mark, May and Odalina focused on the things they had inside the Exceed personnel carrier, they finished early. Odalina went off to help with moving out things from the other vehicles. Mark, on the other hand, was troubled about 3 things. 2 of the 3 lay down unconscious inside 3 cages in front of him and May. The first one was Vem. This embodiment of lust was brought back by him without really thinking too much about it. He just found her as an interesting creature and nothing else. Second, there was the king type, infected. It was glaring at Mark while lying down inside its cage. Its throat was already hoarse from screaming and growling that there was no voice coming out of its mouth anymore. Probably, Mark would observe an experiment on this guy before actually killing it. The third one was nothing else but the water bug he caught from Laguna Lake. While Mark was looking at the unconscious water bug, someone wandering around passed by, which Mark immediately called. Annika, come here for a bit. The girl was amazed about the place that early in the morning, she was wandering around looking at almost everything. She even entered every place she could enter. Of course, she knew that there were places that she could not enter and did not force herself to. As Mark called her, she skipped toward him. What is it, big brother? Can you tame this one? Mark pointed at the water bug. He was not sure if she would be able to and how she would react to this creature. After all, it would not be surprising if she was afraid of cockroach-like insects like this water bug. Unexpectedly, she crouched in front of the cage. Can I touch it? She turned to Mark and asked. It's fine. I made it unconscious, so even if you tear off its legs, it won't attack. Hearing that, Annika puffed her cheeks like a squirrel. Do you want me to tame it or kill it? Don't say something like that to animals and insects when they did nothing wrong, all right? Mark was scolded by the young lady. He could only shrug his shoulders. All right. I won't do it anymore. Good, Annika replied, puffing out her almost non-existent chest with a proud look. Mark could hear May trying to muffle her giggles beside him. It seemed that she did not have a bad impression of Annika and found her antics rather amusing. So, Mark spoke, ignoring the muffled giggles. Can you tame it? To that question, Annika tapped the water bug in different parts of its body as if trying out something. Finally, with a complicated look, she turned to Mark and replied. I can probably try first. You see, I never tried taming an insect. My pets are either birds, mammals, reptiles. Mutated insects are very troublesome to catch, and most of them had uncanny ways to protect themselves. It's dangerous for us to keep one before. Also, the intelligence of insects is way lower than animals. We never encountered one smart enough to form a relationship with humans. That was reasonable. Mark could not help but nod. He also noticed that fact. Compared to mutated animals, there were more muted insects that were proven to be more dangerous. All right. I will leave that guy to you. Don't worry, I guarantee that this guy is among the smarter ones from the place I caught it. Really, if that's true, then it will be easier. Annika replied with a happy expression. She was also eager to try to tame an insect for the first time. After another hour, the preparations were finished. Mark and those capable of driving all went out, bringing the slaves that were left from the battle yesterday. As they were given some food during the night out of pity, they looked better now. Unexpectedly, about half of the slaves decided to stay. There were just 23 slaves left. From Mark's estimate yesterday, there should be around 50 slaves. It seemed that most of them ran off during the battle. Among these 23, 10 kneeled in front of Mark to let them stay. He decided to let those slaves in. They were sincere enough in his view. Of course, he made them know that a wrong and ill move would cost their life in this base. They better behave and listen to those that manage the base. As for the remaining 13, they had no plans to join Mark, who they saw slaughtering people without batting an eyelid. They knew about the military settlement in Infanta and would rather go there. Mark would not stop these people. He let them ride out of the forest until the highway. From there, however, they were free to leave on their own. They were not Mark's people. He had no reason to escort them further from that. However, Hallie and the others convinced him to at least give them weapons to protect themselves till they reached the settlement. Since that was not a problem, Mark agreed and gave them some crossbows, arrows, spears, and swords. As for a vehicle, they should try finding their own. Mark and his group had no vehicles to spare. Reaching the highway a few minutes after 12, the slaves left. Some of them were somehow reluctant. Nevertheless, it was already late for them to change their mind. Thus, all 13 of them made their way towards the next town and looked for a vehicle they could use. After splitting from the slaves, Mark and his group made their way to the place they left Chaflar. As soon as they arrived, they immediately went to load the things inside the vehicles. Fortunately, without the body of Garvlam and Imi inside the Exceed disintegrator fortress. They had a lot of space to spare inside the modified lorry. They managed to load everything into the vehicles and did not need to go back here anymore. Aside from that, Mark and the others were rather happy after arriving here. It seemed that to make up for yesterday where Chaflar was caught sleeping, the dragon caught several animals instead of eating everything it saw. Unexpectedly, it caught a pair of male and female mutated cows, a male mutated grebe, and a hen about the size of a German shepherd. The animals were trapped shivering inside a house guarded by Chaflar. These poor animals would surely shiver at a sight of a dragon. Mark was not mad at Chaflar at all about yesterday. However, it seemed that Chaflar was really afraid that he was angry. He could not help but commend the dragon for its work, making it feel relieved. Thus, not only they managed to retrieve the supplies, they would go back with livestock to raise. Nevertheless, looking at the animals, anyone would surely tilt their heads. The grebe looked fine even though it was larger than its normal counterparts. However, the pattern on its feathers and its color surely resembled some depictions of a Vegavis. As for the cows, although their color was the same, their horns were unbelievably as large as a bull and was shaped like a ram's. Their fur was also on the longer side, though still short to be the same as yaks. For the chicken, aside from being as large as an adult German Shepherd, its tail feathers were rather longer than it should be. It was also as white as snow. It would be hard to see it if it was placed in a white painted background, as its beak and comb were also white. Only its eyes had a reddish color similar to a starling. With the threat of chaflar, it became awfully easy to make the animals board the vehicles. They all seemed to be in a sad mood as their freedom was taken away from them. Nevertheless, for sure, Mark's base was safer for these animals to stay. Returning back to the base through a bumpy ride, everyone had another reason to rejoice. The base awfully needed livestock to increase the variety of food and nutrition everyone could intake. This timing was the best for everyone. For tomorrow, Mark planned to go out with the same team once more. This time, they had to retrieve the supplies they left at the mansion. Nevertheless, it seemed that they had some uninvited guests to meet there.